Hello everyone, and welcome to the final round of the 2018 Sinquefield Cup. It's a game between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. Now, I will also show the game between Levan Aronyan and Alexander Grishuk, although this game did have a greater impact on the standings of the entire event, so I decided to show this one first. But I will show the other one today as well. Before we check out the game, I would just like to briefly address the whole matter of copyright infringement St. Louis Chess Club had against me. They contacted me yesterday, and in their email they said that they discussed the whole matter with their attorney, and they decided that I have in no way infringed their copyrights. So I decided to, not even talk about this anymore, but then I saw a tweet by Peter Sviller on Twitter. He said that me showing the email was a douche move. Now, there's a very nice reason why me showing the email was not a douche move. The email from which I was contacted by Tammy is already a public email. It's not her private email or anything. It's an email that can easily be found under contacts of the St. Louis Chess Club website. On the other hand, the contents of the email is not a private matter. It is, they are basically threatening to sue me or, take down my channel, which is a pretty big thing to me, if I don't comply with their request, which is to take down my videos. I do not intend to take down my videos. So, if they want, they could probably take down my channel, as YouTube doesn't really care who's right. They just don't really like disputes. But neither the email that was used to address me nor the contents of the email are a private matter. So I really don't see how that is a douche move. And I say this with the utmost respect for Peter Sviller. He is one of the greatest chess commentators in the world. He is one of the strongest chess players in the world. Not only that, he's a legend Hearthstone player. So I really do have the utmost respect for him. And I don't know if he's just siding with them because he's currently their employee. Or that is his real opinion. But regardless of everything, that is not a private matter. So that being said, they said that this is not copyright infringement, and nothing will most likely happen to my channel. But we'll see how it goes. I was not impressed how this whole thing turned out. So regarding this game, getting back to it, like we said, it's a game from the final round of the 2018 Sinquefield Cup. Carlsen has the white pieces. As going into this round, Caruana is in the lead by half a point. If Carlsen wants to make anything, he definitely has to win this game, because it's very unlikely that Caruana will lose his game. And even if he loses his game and Carlsen draws, then he's just going to be even. So he definitely has to win this game. So it's very interesting how this whole thing turns out. He opens with knight to f3, the Reti opening. Knight to f6, d4, e6, c4, and the d5, transposing into the Queen's Gambit declined, as, of course, we always transpose into the Queen's Gambit declined recently. Knight to c3, bishop to e7, bishop to f4. We have castles, e3, and b6 now going into the Harrwitz variation. Bishop to d3, d captures on c4, a standard theme. Black will wait for white to develop the light square bishop, and only when the light square bishop is developed will then only capture on c4, making white waste a tempo. And now bishop to a6. We have queen to e2, bishop captures, queen captures, and now c5. D captures on c5, we have b captures on c5, and now Carlsen castles. It seems a bit odd to play this d captures on c5 move. Why would you trade from the center? But now, after all is said and done, the material is equal on the board. Carlsen has two connected pawns on the queen side, whereas Nakamura has two isolated pawns on the queen side. So what white will want to do, definitely Carlsen will want to make these two pawns a target. How will he do it? Well, let's just see. Knight c6, Nakamura develops the knight, rook a to c1, preparing the rook to attack the c5 pawn, rook to c8, countering the rook, and now knight to e5. Here, Nakamura could definitely exchange, captures, and then go queen b6 to add protection to the c5 pawn, and also go for the b2 pawn, but Nakamura decides to keep the tension on the board. Queen to b6. Now Carlsen exchanges on c6, and here we have rook captures on c6. b3, as the b2 pawn was under attack, h6, and now comes rook to d1. h6, probably he wants to make some room for the king, so, you know, it often is a useful move, but right in this position, I don't think bishop to g5 was ever a threat. Perhaps he wants to do something like knight h7 to g5, but I don't really see the real idea behind h6. I'm sure there is one, but it is far beyond me. So okay, rook f to d1, queen to b7, with ideas of guarding the d7 square. If any exchanges are made, for example, on e4, then the queen is already guarding the d7 square. We have h3 by Carlsen, again, also making room for the king and perhaps making an escape route for the bishop. Rook f to c8, doubling up on the c file, and now knight to a4. And we have knight to d7 by Nakamura, adding further protection to the c5 pawn, and also planning knight b6 to exchange knights. Rook to d2, we have knight captures, and here a very interesting moment in the game. Nakamura goes rook captures on b6. Pawn captures on b6 does seem like an automatic thing to do. You know, you get rid of your two isolated pawns. Now you have two connected passed pawns, not passed pawns, but two connected pawns. But Nakamura prefers to capture with the rook. Here you would also get rook c to d1, like what happened in the game. And a similar position would most likely arise after rook d7, queen goes here, and a4 defending the pawn. Now black would want to infiltrate the position via queen to b4. And here we would most likely have the same thing that happened in the game, this bishop captures on h6 idea. And then black would waste a pawn, but here queen to b4 can be played, and then black gains some activity. If the queens are exchanged, then black gets an open c-file for the rooks. But it would be very interesting because here g captures on h6 would lose the queen to g4 check. King to h8, and now rook captures on f7, attacking the bishop. Queen h5 capturing here is an idea also. The rook is coming, the other rook is coming to d7. Black would be lost here, and it's a very interesting variation because it's similar to what happened in the game. After knight captures, Nakamura played rook captures on b6. Rook cd1. Now Carlsen doubles up on the d file, threatens rook to d7. And we have bishop to f6. Nakamura allows it. Rook to d7, queen to a6, offering to trade queens, and now queen to e4. Here Carlsen is preparing bishop captures on h6. And here Nakamura plays the strongest move recommended by the engine, e5. He calculates precisely that this is no threat for black. And although, I mean, who would want to allow this with black? It's very interesting. He calculates precisely and sees that this is fine for him. So okay, Carlsen goes bishop captures on h6, and now what do you play here? Like in the variation that we just checked out, if g captures on h6, black is lost here, but not because of the same idea queen g4. Feel free to pause the video here and try to find why black would be lost here, what move wins the game for white. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, rook captures on f7. The idea is queen to h7 checkmate. If you want to prevent this, you have to capture the rook, but then queen to h7 comes nonetheless. King moves, and now comes rook to d7, and there is no defense against queen to f7 checkmate. You can give up, some material before checkmate really happens, but those are silly moves. So yeah, after bishop captures on h6, rook to e8 was played, and Carlsen said that when he saw this rook to e8 move, that he was very impressed by Nakamura's defense and saw that he doesn't really have all that much. Queen to g4, now pinning the g7 pawn, and now Nakamura in cold blood captures on a2. So he says, Carlsen, you have nothing here. And Carlsen agrees, he pushes e4. If he goes for something like rook to d6 to threaten, to exchange rooks, maybe bring the other rook over, threaten the bishop, then black can simply play captures, and queen to b1 check. After king moves, now the queen can retreat, and black defends properly here, and there is nothing for white to look for here. So here after queen captures on a2, Carlsen goes e4. After such an exchange, for example, happens, then the queen will no longer be able to come back into the defense of the king so quickly, as the e4 pawn would be in the way. So okay, queen captures on b3, Nakamura grabs another pawn, and here a very interesting moment in the game. The engine gives rook captures on a7, really cold-blooded move, simply grabbing a pawn, restoring the material balance on the board, but Carlsen doesn't gain anything from drawing this game. He has to win this game, and he really wants to win it. He retreats, bishop to e3, pressures the c5 pawn. We have rook to b7. Now Nakamura no longer allows Carlsen to capture on a7. And here if you capture, queen captures, bishop captures on c5, you get a5, and still it would be very hard to push for anything here with white or black. So Carlsen decides to keep the pressure going. Rook to d6, now threatening rook captures bishop. Bishop to e7 is played, attacking the rook, and now rook to d5, pressuring the c5 pawn. Bishop to f8, now the rook is guarding the e5 pawn as well, so now bishop captures. Bishop captures, rook captures, and queen to e6, offering a trade of queens. Carlsen declines, queen to e2. We have rook to d7, and now rook captures on d7. Queen captures on d7, and now comes rook to d5. Queen to c7, and queen to d2. So here we have a position, material on the board is completely equal. Carlsen has 4 pawns on the king side, Nakamura has 3, but he does have a passed pawn on the queen side. So what Carlsen wants to do, Carlsen would definitely enjoy grabbing the a7 pawn, and then hopefully somehow go into an endgame with 4 pawns against 3, but this is not possible, simply. As you'll see in the game, rook to a8 by Nakamura, he prepares to push the passed pawn. We have rook to d7, queen moves, and now f3, improving the position of the pawns. Queen c5 check, king moves, and now queen to c6. The king will be very safe there because black's e5 pawn will not allow for any tricks against the white king, and now white will try to push for advantage, but it will be very hard. Rook to d6, we have queen to c5, and now rook to a6. Queen goes back, we have queen to e3, pressuring the a7 pawn, and now king to h7. While the queen and rook are guarding the a7 pawn, there is no way whatsoever that white can ever capture this pawn. So what can be done here? King to g3 by Carlsen, queen to b7, and now comes queen to a3. We have f6, king to h2, and queen to c7. So Nakamura can simply move the queen back and forth. There is nothing Carlsen can do here, but he has to win this game. Queen to a1. We have queen to b7. Nakamura simply repeats. We have queen to a5, queen to d7, queen to a2, and now queen to e7. Queen to f2, we have queen to b7, queen back to a2, and Nakamura repeats, queen to e7. If Carlsen would repeat, Nakamura would also repeat, and this game would end in a draw. But Carlsen doesn't want a draw. Queen to d5, he attacks Nakamura's rook on a8. So okay, no big deal. Rook to b7, as the pawn is only attacked once, I only have to defend it twice. Queen to a5, attacking the pawn twice, and now rook to b7, simply defending the pawn twice. Queen e1. Carlsen finds a way to complicate matters. We have queen to d7, and now comes queen to h4 check. King moves, okay, no big deal, and Carlsen retreats, queen to f2. We have queen to f7, and here's the thing, what Carlsen found. He finds queen to a2. And you might think, okay, exchanging queens will only make it easier to draw for black. And while this is true, you have to put yourself in Carlsen's position here. He has to win this game. He can never win it while black is firmly controlling, defending the a7 pawn. So even if drawing with the queens off the board would be even easier, as he explored all of his options of winning with the queens on the board, he will simply remove the queens off the board. So queen to f7, queen to a2, and now captures. And okay, now it's a rook against a rook, and the material on the board is equal. So how do you do this? King h7 was played, we have rook to a6, now king to g6, h4, and here king to h5. King to h3, we have rook to f7, and now g4 with check. King to h6, and here Carlsen plays king to g3. And now it seems that the most reasonable thing to do is simply move the rook back and forth, and there doesn't seem to be a way white can push for any advantage here. But Nakamura decides for some reason to push g5. And okay, it's still most likely a draw, but here Carlsen pushes h5, and he does create a passed pawn here. So now, a moment ago, Nakamura was the only player with a passed pawn here. Now Carlsen also has a passed pawn, but it's not the only problem is not the passed pawn, but now also the passed pawn controls the g6 square. So black will have a lot less options when he has to make a move. So okay, king to g7, and now king to f2. Now Carlsen's idea is he wants to bring the king over, well, not with that route, but he wants to take the king over to the queen side and perhaps capture the a7 pawn. Rook to b7, rook to a3, now making room for the king, king to h6, and now king to e3. And here, the best idea for black would be to go rook to d7, not allow the king to enter the game, but Carlsen would play a rook to d3 and then, regardless, get his king over to the queen side, while keeping the rook to defend the f3 pawn. But this would probably still be black's best bet here. But after king to e3, Nakamura decided to play a5. He gives up the a5 pawn for this counterplay, and he thought that he will be able to keep the king away. Carlsen captures the pawn. We have rook to b3 check, king to f2, rook to b2 check, and king to g3. And okay, Nakamura did push the king all the way back to g3, but you know, the game's not over. King to g7, rook to a7 check, king moves back, and now comes rook to a1. King to g7, and now rook to f1, preparing rook to f2, and now the king will be able to get back into the game. Rook to a2, we have rook to f2, opposing the rook. Now you no longer have the option of exchanging rooks because you are now down a pawn, and also white has a passed pawn. Rook to a3, rook to d2, making room for the king to enter, rook to a7, and now king to f2. King to f7, king to e2, we have rook to b7, and now rook to d3, making room for the king. Rook to b2 check will not do really anything. King comes to e3, and then the rook will move. The king will be able to enter the game this way. So instead, Nakamura goes rook to a7, and now we have king to d2. King e6, king c3, king to e7, king to c4. Rook c7 check, king to b5. Rook to c1. Carlsen simply blocks any checks with the rook. Now the rook is guarding the f3 pawn and also protecting the king. King to f7, and now king to b6. Rook to c2, king to b7. Black doesn't really have any good replies here. Rook to c1 and king to b8. We have king goes back, and now comes rook to b6, attacking the f6 pawn. King g7 defending, and now rook to b7 check. This was very important. King to g8, and now rook to c7, opposing Nakamura's rook on c1. Rook b1 check, and now king can approach the black king. Rook b3, attacking the pawn, and now king to d7. Carlsen calculates precisely that he has to, of course, give up the f3 pawn to make progress here. Rook captures, and now king to e6. We have rook to f4, attacking both pawns, the g and the e pawn, and now comes h6. We have king to h8, and now comes rook to b7. King goes back, and now rook to g7, as black was in Zugzwang. King goes back, and now comes king to f7. Rook captures on e4, and now comes king to g6. Rook to a4, and now rook to h7 was played. Nakamura was in check, and here, after staring at the position in disbelief for about some 10 minutes or maybe less, Nakamura decided to resign the game. Why did he resign? Well, after he moves, Carlsen has rook to e7 with the threat of checkmate. To prevent this, you have to go rook a8, and then comes simply king captures on f6. e4, king captures on g5, and pretty much whatever you do, you will lose all the material here. And after all is said and done, white would be up two connected passed pawns in a completely winning position. So after this rook to h7 check, Nakamura resigned, and an unbelievable victory for Magnus Carlsen in the final round of the 2018 Sinquefield Cup, where the position was very rich, and that whole bishop captures on h6 was a wonderful idea, really an exciting moment. But then after Nakamura's rook e8, the game pretty much went into a drawish phase. But once again, the world champion Magnus Carlsen shows us that a drawn position is not a drawn game. If you wish, you can play it forever, and the stronger player, not just the better player regarding chess, but the better nerves, the better psychology, the better stamina will in the end win you the game, which is something we witnessed in the games of Bobby Fischer. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you're enjoying the coverage of the 2018 Sinquefield Cup so far. I would like to thank Pierre Asaf, Mohanad Alabdul, Warren Tutwiler and his buddy, Mark Olson, and Thomas Timmerman for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. I did receive other contributions as well, but I will have to thank you in the other video as I only have room for 5 people here. But thank you as well. I will show the Aronian versus Grishuk video soon, and it's very interesting. Warren Tutwiler and his buddy are the 2 gentlemen. I've shown their photo on my video, the 2 gentlemen with Caruana. One of them was carrying Caruana's big head, and he thanked me for showing that photo in the video, but unfortunately the gentleman at the St. Louis Chess Club did not. So yeah, I mean, I'm very unimpressed by how this whole thing with the St. Louis Chess Club turned out, as like I always say, I have the utmost respect for all of their members, you know, for Yasser Serovan especially. He's a legend. I mean, I myself would rather watch Yasser talk about anything for 10 hours rather than watch a 15 video I made. But I mean, my 15 to 10 or 15 minutes videos are in no way a threat to their live coverages or anything. They can only be an addition to them, you know, as I always invite people to check out the original footage, check out the live coverage. I always give credit to everyone who was involved. Sometimes I forget it, but it's not because I'm a mean or anything, you know, I just forget to do it. But most likely in all of my videos it will all be in the description below. So yeah, that's I mean, that's very sad how, you know, in my opinion, how all of this turned out, but yeah, such is the way of chess, obviously. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think Rex Sinquefield would be all that impressed if he knew how his resources were spent trying to prevent the promotion of chess. But yeah, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with the Arena versus Grishuk game and the wonderful sacrifice on f7. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.